The higher mind, also referred to the higher self, authentic self, or the soul, is the timeless and immortal aspect of ourselves that is aware of the past, the present, and the future all at the same time, simultaneously. That means that the past and the future disappear and merge into the present moment, into the now. The higher mind is what's active when someone is in a state of presence. And it's hard enough to get into a state of presence, let alone stay in a state of presence. So in this video, what I want to do is break down what really creates presence and how we can maintain that authentic aspect, that connection with our higher self. To cut straight to the point, it is emotion that takes us out of the present moment. It is emotion that disconnects us from our higher self and drops us down into the lower self. When we become emotional, we become unconscious. And when we become unconscious, we go into avoid and seek mode. Avoid emotional pain, seek emotional pleasure. When this happens, we start to become reactive, but not only that, any pre-programming, preconditioned patterns of behavior we have in our unconscious mind, they're going to play out. And they're what keep us just avoiding pain and seeking pleasure, but never truly being inspired. Now, this can happen on different time frames. It can happen on a short time frame or a long time frame. An example of something on a short time frame would be if someone was criticized. In the moment they were criticized, maybe they got angry, they got defensive, and they started to defend themselves. That's quite a short time frame. But also we can become emotional and reactive on longer time frames with these preconditioned patterns. An example of that is maybe someone's feeling deeply unworthy, so they have that emotion in them, low self-worth, shame. From there, they're going to have a pattern of behavior playing out to try and seek validation, to try and gain worth through unconscious patterns of behavior. Both scenarios are driven by emotion. They're both driven by the lower mind. So when it comes to understanding the higher mind and the authentic self, we really need to understand emotion. And to understand emotion, we have to understand perception. And there are some guidelines that I want to give you when it comes to perceptions and emotions. Now, the first is there are three things. The first one is that all emotion operates by a law. There is a law behind emotion. It is the law of cause and effect. Every emotion that is the effect we experience comes from a prior cause. And that cause is our perceptions. That's the first point. All emotion operate through law. The second point is the perceptions of either loss or gain of something we value are what lead to the emotion. So number one, all emotion runs by law. Number two, the perception of either loss or gain of something we value leads to that emotion. Now, the third point I want to make is that when we perceive the presence of something we value, we have a positive emotion. When we perceive the loss of something we value, we experience a negative emotion. So they're the three sort of guidelines and laws when it comes to perceptions and emotions that I wanted to share so that you can understand when we get to the next part how these relate to maintaining that connection with the authentic self. The moment we perceive something within time and space to either be present or absent, we become emotional. The reason is because anytime we measure something, we dualize it. And when we dualize something, so we put it into two, either present or absent, when we dualize it, we then become polarized, good, bad, right, wrong, positive, negative, in relation to it. And that polarity is what creates emotion within us. Now, for example, if we value money, and then we went and looked at our bank account, and we noticed that money was present. The amount of money we were expecting to be there was presence of money, we're gonna have a positive emotional reaction to that. Now, if we went and we looked at the bank account and there was an absence of money, the money wasn't there, we're going to have a negative emotional reaction to it. Now, the greater degree of presence and absence, the greater the emotional reaction. So if we have an expectation of a lot of money and there's a big gap between what we expect and what's there, the bigger the emotional reaction is going to be. And that emotional reaction, based on our perceptions of loss or gain of the thing we value, is what disconnects us from our higher self. That's what disconnects us from being authentic. Now, as you can see, I've drawn a diagram showing presence and absence, and the fact that they are both just two sides of the same coin. So if we're judging something, perceiving something, measuring something, and it's present, to what degree is it present or to what degree is it absent? And if our judgment says it's present, we're probably going, and we value it, we're going to feel pretty good. If our judgment says that it's absent, we're going to feel pretty bad. And wherever we are on that scale, when that judgment is made, is what dictates our emotional reaction. So we can also look at our perceptions or measurements as expectations. They're all one and the same thing. If we have a process of measuring and then making a judgment, so we're perceiving it to either be there or not be there. Anytime we measure it, perceive it, really there is an expectation. If there was no expectation, which we're going to get into soon, again, there would be no judgment. If you had no expectation of how much money was in your account, then when you looked at it, it wouldn't matter where it was. But as soon as you have an expectation or you make a measurement, in that moment you dualize it, and that's when we come into that emotional pain. So what we're going to talk about now, we're going to go through 6 different ways that we can maintain that connection with our higher self, our authentic self. So here we go, the 6 different ways that you can retain a connection with your authentic self. Now the first way is to value everything equally. So that means that if you had absence of money, okay, you were poor, you valued that equally as much as having presence of money. So it didn't matter then if your bank account went down, if it went up, you could appreciate both equally. Now, if you can truly do that with everything, that is the enlightened state. That is when you no longer see loss or gain, and you no longer have those emotional reactions because you value absence of wealth as much as presence of wealth, absence of a person as much as presence of a person, absence of your social status equally as much as presence of your social status. When you value everything equally, you no longer see loss or gain. All you see is change and transformation. And so there is nothing pulling you down into emotion, nothing pulling you down into your lower self. So that is the first way, and that really is what it means to be enlightened. Now the second way is to see anything that occurs within our lives as a blessing. What I mean by that is, if we have a mission or a purpose, something we're dedicating our life towards, something that we're consistently working towards, and we see anything that happens as a means to that end, then again, using our example, if we gain wealth, we can appreciate it because it's a means to meet our end, our mission. This is our mission or our purpose. This is our highest value. Or if we were to lose our wealth, you can appreciate how that is helping us complete our mission. So when you have an inspired purpose, something you're working towards, something that gives your life meaning, then what happens within your life just becomes a stepping stone towards achieving that mission. And you can appreciate the absence or the presence of those things that you value. Instead of them dropping you down into an emotional state, freaking out, experience negative emotions, chasing positive in the avoid and seek lower mind, you can stay authentic, centered, and inspired during any of those things that happen in your life. Now, the third thing is something that not many people talk about, and maybe even when I suggest it, you might question it. And this is to take time out of the equation. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but if we can set timeless intentions, timeless goals, if we can take time out of the equation, again, there's no measuring then, and there's no polarization occurring. For example, if you maybe wanted to find your soulmate, you wanted to go into a relationship, and you set a time frame on it, as soon as you say, I would love to be in a relationship by the end of this year, or I want to be in a relationship by the end of this year, as soon as that time frame comes in, there's now pressure. There's now pressure, which is emotion, which then drives us into that seek and avoid behavior, and we start freaking out because the timeline is coming in. If someone needs time as leverage for motivation, then they're not really inspired. They're motivated, which is ineffective, especially if we're talking about you. So set timeless goals, which means there are things you intend to do or experience or have. There are things that you intend, but there's no time frame on it. That way there's no pressure, there's no stress. It's just a process of becoming. And so no measurements occur because there's no time. You're not going, has it happened yet? Has it not happened yet? Which then, if you were to do that, again, measurement, as soon as there's a measurement, there's a duality, and as soon as there's duality, there's polarity, and again, emotion drives you. So that's the third thing. Take time out of the equation. If you're going to set goals and intentions, make them timeless, make them forever, make them immortal, the same as your soul. Now the next two, number 4 and 5, are quite similar and also quite simple. Now the first one is, don't expect anyone or anything to operate outside of universal law. It's like throwing a ball up in the air and expecting it to stay up in the air without gravity pulling it back down. Anytime you have an expectation for someone or something to live outside of a universal law, that expectation cannot be met. And so there's going to be polarity. If you expect something to happen that physically cannot happen, when it inevitably doesn't happen, you're going to become frustrated. So I see people investing their money and they expect the stock market to keep going up forever and for them to keep making money, when truly that's not how the world works. And when it comes down and they've had expectations of it staying up, they become disappointed and frustrated. So that's the fourth one. Now the fifth one is quite similar. Don't expect anybody to live outside of their own value system. Now the last one was about appreciating the universe and universal laws. This one is about appreciating an individual's value system, just appreciating their value system, which means not to have expectations for other people to do things the same way that you would likely do something. So if you ever become annoyed and say to yourself, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, that's because you've projected your values onto them. And as soon as that happens, you're again dualizing things. So there is the absence of your way of doing things, the presence of their way of doing things, and the polarity kicks in, emotion kicks in, and then again, it disconnects us from our higher self. So those two are pretty similar. It's about having expectations on universal laws and expectations for other people to live outside of their value system. And the last one, number 6, is don't compare yourself to other people. So what should you do? Well, you should appreciate yourself for who you are. Appreciate your own strengths and weaknesses. You see, the moment we compare ourselves to someone else, whether we look up to them or we look down to them, because we can compare positively or compare negatively. If we look up to someone, we're saying there is an absence within us and a presence within them. And when we do that, so they have something that we want that we don't have. And again, that puts us into polarity, and that makes us feel less than, unworthy, not good enough. And then the emotional patterns kick in, and we take action based on motivation. We either shrink, hide, and run away, or we try and become better and force ourselves to become better. But that's the lower mind. That's the ego driving it, right? And the other way we can compare is when we look down upon others. So we perceive something present in us and absent in them. And as soon as we do that, again, emotional polarity and our pride kicks in, and then we think we're better than others, and we have pride. And again, that is the ego, that is the lower self. So when our higher mind is active, that's when we have clarity. That's when we are the most adaptable. That's when we have enthusiasm to go after the things that inspire us most, our mission, our highest values. We're no longer pulled off of course by our emotions, avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, trying to be accepted, trying to validate ourselves, trying to make money. When we're driven by that inspired mission, that is, in fact, I would say, when our higher mind is active, that's when we're clear on what our inspired mission is. So if you're there watching going, I don't even know what my mission or my purpose is, that is because it's still the emotions pulling you from side to side. The other thing I want to note is that when we're connected to that higher self, the authentic self, that is when synchronicities occur in our life. That's when grace occurs. That's when magic occurs in our life. Opportunities come in, blessings come in that we could never predict, we could never foresee. It's the magic of the universe working to support us to complete our inspired mission.